In the last video, we took a look at the Makina W67, a beautiful camera with an amazing lens. Now that camera is almost like a niche of a niche of a niche, but today we're going to be taking a look at its older brother. The one that's slightly more popular in school, the one that does better at sports, the one that gets more attention, but in this case, to me, completely deserving of that attention, the Makina 67. This camera is pretty much my favorite medium format camera. Across all formats of 120 film, 645, 66, 69, this camera is a gem. In terms of its form, its usability, the experience of shooting it, and on top of everything, the pictures that it makes. In the last video, we covered all the buttons, the dials, the usability of the W67, which this camera shares a bunch of similarities with. So today, instead of talking about the ergonomic side of things, we're going to be focusing on what truly makes it special, compared to every other camera out there, both film and digital. So let's jump right in. All the color pictures you're about to see were developed with the Cinestill CS41 kit at home on a rotary processor. The first thing that I love about this camera is its portability. It folds down into a really thin form that fits easily even into the smallest bags. And the reason why this is such a practical upside for me has to do with my relationship with medium format film. The thing is, I primarily shoot on a small format camera in black and white. My main camera is a Leica MP, which I have with me throughout my day, and I'm that guy who always has a camera around, and that's kind of been my life since 2014. And with a small format camera, it's light, it's nimble. In it, I have it loaded with high ISO black and white film and an f1.4 lens. The Leica is a camera that I can use in bright light, in low light, indoors and outdoors. It's super practical, and it pretty much takes care of a large majority of my picture making. But with kind of lo-fi black and white film on a small format camera, that's like a notepad, right? Something you use to quickly jot down notes. It's casual, it's fast, and like a notepad, sometimes your handwriting goes all over the place. Sometimes you scratch things out, you tear out a piece of paper, then you rewrite things. It's more raw, like a handwritten note. And it has its own beauty and charm to it, which I love. And say 80 to 90% of all my pictures are made on 35mm film in black and white. But then sometimes you come across a scene full of tiny details that all intrigue you, where the nuance, the descriptive properties of the fine details of everything in that moment. As you're standing there looking at it, your eye is able to focus on the small things, but you simply can't take everything in, the details of everything all at once, because there's just too much information in the scene for you to hold in your mind. And that's what medium format is amazing at: intricacy and fidelity. The ability to render many different shades of tones, something that you can print big, take a small step back, and experience again. The sensation of keenly seeing, allowing your eyes to wander around the frame freely and with curiosity. A small format is slightly more limited in that regard, and that's where this camera comes in. Because it folds down into a compact form, most of the time it's out of the way, out of sight and out of mind. It's in a tiny shoulder bag and it's light enough that you don't really feel when it's there, but when it counts, it unfolds so quickly, ready for action. And its ability to almost disappear, then come back into the action when you need it, is something that I really appreciate. The next thing that makes the Makina 67 really special is its lens. This camera uses an 80mm f2.8 Nikkor lens, which is roughly a 40mm f1.2 in the 35mm film world. Now I say roughly because with a bigger format, even though the field of view might be similar, like this is roughly 40mm, the way it renders a scene is going to look slightly different compared to a smaller format. Now people have debated this for years and years. Some people say that there is no difference between sensor or film size. Others, especially people who have used large format cameras for many years, they tend to describe the difference as the way a picture renders space. For me, how I really experienced this for myself was actually going up in film formats. When I went from 35mm to say 645, that difference wasn't too big. I didn't really feel that sense of size. But when I got the 6.7, that's where I really felt the difference. Now, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty details of that debate in this video, nor do I find it a super productive discussion, but I just wanted to highlight that when you hear 80mm f2.8, that's a quantifiable measurement of the focal length and the aperture. But those things are just numbers. They're just specs. They don't give you a sense of the qualitative aspects of a lens. So when you hear things like charm, like a classic look, a modern look, three-dimensionality, flatness, amongst many other things, some quite quantifiable, things like aberration, coma, resolution, but other things not so quantifiable, things like shape, like clarity. All those things are just descriptors on what makes a beautiful lens. And this lens is a beautiful lens. This is pretty much amongst the best lenses that I've ever used, and that list is short. Kodak Aerial Ektar, amazing. Certain copies of Rolleiflex 2.8Fs, amazing. Makina 6.7, amazing. Amongst the best. So when you buy this camera, in terms of output, the pictures that it is able to make, to me, it's amongst the best picture making machines that this world has to offer. With this lens and this format, you're able to make a wide picture of a scene and still create a sense of depth between the foreground and the background. You're able to perceive distance and space, especially when you're viewing pictures large. There is so much depth communicated with this lens. And when you actually look closely at what's in focus, the sheer amount of detail is really, really good. More than sharp enough for what I'm looking for, and I've regularly made 100 megapixel scans with the pictures made on this camera. Also really nice is its perspective. 80mm on 6.7 sits very squarely in what is commonly thought of as a normal perspective, meaning that you're not getting too much compression like a tighter lens. There is not too much of the keystone effect compared to a wider lens, and distance is also quite accurately represented. For example, if you made a picture of something, say 3 meters away, it doesn't feel too far or too close. It overall looks very natural, and this focal length is very practical, and it's a perspective that will work very well for many different scenes. So that is the lens. Really amazing. Now, the last thing that I really love about this camera is its practicality, and by that I mean its usability in low light. When we think low light, we oftentimes think ISO speed, aperture, but there is another aspect to low light usability as well, which I talked briefly about in the last video, and that is the ergonomics of a camera, its physical design. Its balance, how it sits in the hand, how smooth that shutter button is, whether or not it causes a slight jerk to the camera. All those things tangibly affects how slow a shutter speed you can use, provided you're using good slow shutter speed technique. Even what kind of shutter it is. For example, a large mirror on the Pentax 6.7 when handheld, that mirror would kick the camera around. So for certain cameras, they don't do so well with slower shutter speeds, and others do really well. And with this camera, I found a ton of usability at those slow shutter speeds. Now, this camera uses a leaf shutter, and it's really nicely balanced in the hands. The shutter button depresses very nicely and smoothly, so even though f2.8 doesn't conventionally sound like a super wide aperture, say compared to f1.4 or f1, with this camera, I found that with proper technique, I've been able to consistently get sharp results down to 1/8 of a second, and when combined with ISO 800 film, that is a ton of practicality in a whole bunch of really dim low light situations. So those are the things that I love about this camera that puts it in a very special place in my heart. Now, if you are considering getting one, the biggest downside is serviceability. So I go deeper into that in the previous video. So if you want more information on that, along with the ergonomics, how the dials work, how to focus, how does its meter look, how does the viewfinder look like, check out that video. And if you want to watch more videos like this, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.